All right, good morning, YouTube. In today's video, I have the sublime honor of having natural hypertrophy on the channel, and we're going to be talking about a topic that has been central to my channel and has been something that he has mentioned in passing in a way that's not entirely too favorable. So we're going to have a pretty civil discussion about it, about power building, the idea of mixing powerlifting and bodybuilding. So my name is Carlos King, stanstrength.com. If you are interested in supporting the channel, you can go to my website, and then I will have Natural Hypertrophy introduce himself as well.
Hello, YouTube. Today we're going to again, have a discussion around this very epinous topic of mixing bodybuilding and powerlifting. If you are watching my channel regularly, you know that I believe there is certain separations that need to occur between the two practices, that YouTube Fitness has, in a sense, blurred the line a bit too much, which has led to both a detrimental approach to bodybuilding and powerlifting. And I think that we're moving towards a clearer, purer approach to both forms and both sports, which is going to be beneficial for both.
All right, perfect. Yeah, because with this video, I really wanted to, I want to lay out my intention with it. First, I want to kind of figure out within this conversation, is power building an idea worth legitimizing, or does it kind of defeat itself the more clear it becomes? And then, so if that's the case, then is this conversation just going to be the final nail in the coffin in the idea of powerlift or power building? So one thing I wanted to get your thoughts on is powerlifting and bodybuilding are two separate and distinct pursuits. But I truly believe that size and strength are not. For the natural lifter, I do think that we don't have the luxury of separating the two, and a bigger muscle will always be a stronger one. Where do you kind of stand on that?
So I think that the discussion of size and strength is one that is very important to have, because most of the time, if you go on YouTube Fitness and you type size versus strength or how to grow your muscles, you'll have very generalistic videos that don't do a very good job. But the issue is that they're very popular because everyone wants to know about it. And so it has led me in the past to say that size and strength are not connected. And it's because I'm trying to fight against the people that are going to tell you, okay, you want to have a good physique, just get stronger. Because this is going to just lead you down a path of training like a powerlifter for the most part, which will not result in the best physiques. Now, where I agree 100% is that if you're going to grow your muscles, you're going to do it through function. And therefore, if the performance of the function increases, the size of the muscle will also increase. That's inevitable. So yes, it's not like you're going to get bigger benching 135 pounds for 5 years. There will be some addition to the bar, and that's progressive overload. As we all know, powerlifter, bodybuilder, calisthenic athlete, strongman, I don't care who you are. You want to get better, you want to get bigger, you're going to have some overload, and that's going to lead to your progression. But the way you're going to go about it and the focus you're going to have on the progression is going to make all of the difference, in my opinion. I think that nowadays we are performance focused. People only think about weight on the bar, and that's where they go wrong.
Yeah, and definitely, I totally agree with that. And especially like going back to that idea, like, when you do look up size versus strength videos, size, strength, and those two things are always being used equivocally for powerlifting or bodybuilding, as if there is like much more distinction between them than like, there is an obvious distinction between them, but I find that there's not as big as one as some would think, where it's just like, oh, you were training for strength, that's totally irrelevant for bodybuilding. Like, I've met a couple people who think like that, where it's just like, well, like they'll see me benching, they'll see me doing like deadlifts and stuff like that, and it's just like, oh, you care about strength, that's not really doing anything for you for bodybuilding. But then at the same time, the person saying it is a twig. So
yeah. And which is crazy too, because when you think about it, compound movements have always been used by bodybuilders. If I were to be a bit audacious, I would even say that bodybuilders started using these movements before powerlifting was even a thing. Strongman, old school strongman and bodybuilding existed at the same time, at the very start of the century, and they both used these movements. Powerlifting came into the scene afterwards, and started using the movements to test strength because they're great movements. But we now live in an age where if you deadlift, as you said, someone will tell you, oh, so you're a powerlifter. Well, no, I'm just doing a hip hinge. I'm a bodybuilder.
Definitely, yeah. And then, so going into the idea of like power building, right? So powerlifting, we know, is the objective sport of 1 rep max on squat, bench, dead. There are competition laws and legal like techniques that kind of make the form in powerlifting look a bit different than how it would look in the gym, and what's best for strength development or size development. And then bodybuilding is more so of an art. It's you building a body that you desire in your own mind and bringing it out, right? So when it comes to power building, I do have a lot of issues with it, which is actually why I made my channel. Power building at its worst is just 5x5 starting strength clone with lateral raises and some curls that are just like, oh, just do 100 of them, because if you do 100, you're probably going to grow. And like, there's just no real good advice for it, like how to scale it over time, how to progress it over time. And I do like remember from your video, it's a long time ago, talking about it, that, you know, from an I can't say this word, etymological,
Etymologically.
There it is. That's the one. Like power building just doesn't make sense from that standpoint. You know, building power, like just slapping bodybuilding, like building at the very end of it. Yeah, like from a semantic point of view, yeah, totally doesn't make sense. But then I started thinking, does it make sense in any other way? And one big or many big weaknesses with power building is that I think first and foremost, it justifies weakness, fatness, complacency, lack of progress, and it gives people a way out. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, you pointed something out that also exists in every single strength sport, and that is that it's going to be also a practice that is going to make people with garbage physiques flock to it, because they can justify their terrible aesthetic appearance with their function, right? It's the functional training meme, which in reality is nonsense and also very insulting, because between a fat guy that wears a belt in between sets and is going to do like 3 sets of squats in 50 minutes and an actual powerlifter, there is a world of difference. But it doesn't stop the second guy from calling himself that, because it's the only thing he can do. That's the one thing he has. So it is the same with power building as well, where you'll have guys again that are going to justify super high body fat and tell you it's, oh, because I'm a power builder. But if you are a power builder and you are the mixture of a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, and they're both housed in your body, if you're high body fat, which of the two is suffering the most? The bodybuilder. So you're not really a bodybuilder. You're just a powerlifter that calls himself a bodybuilder on the side, because I guess it sounds cool. And also because, and it's something I just realized as well, if you say you're power building, people are much less likely to pressure you into showing your 1 rep max and saying, okay, well, do you compete? Because that's what powerlifting is all about. It's about competing. Whereas bodybuilding is a state of existence. It's not the same thing. So these guys have that cop out. Oh, no, I'm a power builder, bro.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and like going back to something you said too, like when it comes to hypertrophy training and like bodybuilding, one thing I noticed, like I only started watching YouTube fitness content back in 2016, but you know, powerlifting like was really on the uprising there. But then so was CrossFit and the functional fitness thing, right? And one thing I always found very interesting about all those styles of training and methodologies and everything like that was that they always used hypertrophy training as their marketing tactic. Like bodybuilding was never really given its like light of day as being like, hey, you want to learn how to be a better boxer, go to a boxing coach. You want to be a better powerlifter, go to a powerlifter. You want to be a better bodybuilder, oh, don't go to the bodybuilders, go to this person, go to that person. And then so many weird things kind of happen, and as a result, powerlifting could kind of grow out of that. And one thing that I want to talk about too is with power building, this is something that I personally have like experienced also, because when I first started training, like Rocky, I would literally watch a Rocky movie right before training, and like he did bodybuilding training. I literally watched Pumping Iron like so many times in high school, and that's all bodybuilding stuff. But then when I discovered powerlifting, I was like, that was when like my fire got ignited. So that's kind of like my background in it, right? But when you have, you know, 2 masters essentially, and you call yourself a power builder, you get really, really bad training ADHD. You bounce around between either one, and then you find that one thing that might work for more strength does not work at all for hypertrophy, and vice versa. So that's why when it comes to power building, I do think that it does fail at saying, and this is something I hate when people say like, oh, power building is the best way to get the best of both worlds. And it's like, no, it's not. It's just when you mix both, you're getting less of both also, but you're getting what you want out of it. And that's something I always try to like push on my channel. But what are your thoughts on that also?
Well, 2 great questions. I'll start with the first one. So as you've noticed, yes, if you were to just observe YouTube fitness as a whole, you would think that everyone is a bodybuilder, because look at thumbnails. Everyone is going to post pictures of them shirtless. Why? Well, because it's the aesthetic appeal of the human body is the best way to sell your programs, your supplements, or even your channel as a whole. I mean, we are building our muscles and bodies, so it's what we're going to show. But you also notice that the vast majority of these people at the same time will tell you that it's stupid to train for aesthetics, that it's not their main pursuit, etc., etc. So it's a little bit strange. Well, the reason why they do it is because it works, of course, because everyone likes to look good, whether you want to believe that or not. I know some people like to believe that they are okay with looking like just a lump of potatoes, but it's not necessarily true. I know some, usually the high-level powerlifters are like this, but the average lifter is not. We're also in it for looks. And then you have to face also the realization that something must have happened, that bodybuilding now is completely destitute. Because as you said, nowadays people will tell you that the best way to look bigger or to get a good physique is to not take advice from bodybuilders. And that stemmed from the pro bodybuilders from like the early 2010 that gave horrendous advice, terrible advice. And at some point when powerlifting came into the scene and all of these people started to move on to powerlifting and they got better results for aesthetics, they thought, okay, well, that just confirms itself. Powerlifting is both the best for strength and size, and therefore that's what I'm going to be doing from now on. The issue is that they were taking advice from pro bodybuilders who give terrible advice. These people don't represent bodybuilding. They don't understand natural bodybuilding because they're out of that game entirely. So 10 years later, you still have the same people who have mediocre physiques, unbalanced physiques. They don't quite understand why. And it's because they need to go back to the source. They need to, again, take lessons from the correct master. And who is your master if you're a bodybuilder? Another bodybuilder with a higher level, certainly never a powerlifter. That's for the first question. Then the second question with the idea of, again, power building being the best of both worlds. Well, that doesn't work like that. It's like if someone told you, okay, I'm going to train for both sprints and marathon. That way I'm going to be amazingly good at both. Well, absolutely not. You'll be mediocre at both. That's what's going to happen. And I would even go as far as to say that one that does both is most likely going to become much better at marathon than at sprinting because of the range difference between the two. The 100-meter dash and the 5 kilometers. There's too much difference between the two. One has more gravity than the other. So you're going to start specializing more towards this one. If we were to compare that to bodybuilding and powerlifting, powerlifting is the marathon. You're going to become a much better powerlifter doing power building than you would become a bodybuilder. And that's because power building is powerlifting with building slapped at the end. So you take any powerlifting program, you add 3 sets of curls, that becomes a power building program. But it's, at the end of the day, it's a powerlifting program with a hat and lipstick. It doesn't make it a bodybuilding program.
Yeah, that's very true. And like, I definitely remember, like you mentioned, like the Kaizen training program. Like, I'm probably too unafraid of like mentioning other things and like on my channel, but I really don't care. But yeah, like I was a huge fan of like Omar Isuf and like Bar Kwan, but when that program came out, and I actually spent money on it too, as a very impressionable 18-year-old, I spent money on it, and I like looking at it, I just thought to myself, this is the worst program I've ever seen. And I ran it for a little bit, and like every single day I went to the gym, I just like got that feeling more and more, and I like was very I don't know, just disappointed. But it wasn't until I found someone like Alphadestiny and like his like, you know, strength training for size kind of philosophy that kind of like helps me get out of that. But at the same time, you know, it still falls victim to all the things that we just mentioned. So now that we kind of established what power building is, where it came from, and all of that kind of stuff, I want to see your thought process on my kind of way of thinking of whether or not it's something we should even like bother with or contend with, right? So power building is something that's very easy to just fall into, right? Like once you kind of get out of that Goldilocks period of like, oh shoot, I started incorporating progressive overload into my training and big basic lifts, I'm getting results. And then you start looking like a sack of potatoes or a spider, you know? It's something that can easily get in the way of your goals. Because now that you're kind of getting a mix of both, you kind of forget where your goal actually is. And then power building, like you said, it is liable to be bad for both. And it's probably going to be better for powerlifting because it always tends to come from that side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And then another thing too is that I want to get this across to as many people as possible, but the big three and any big basic barbell compound lift it doesn't belong to powerlifters by any means. I truly 100% believe that, and I believe that for like a long time. But I think whenever when I started managing gyms, not just being a trainer, because when I'm a trainer, you know, I can say like, hey, do this lift, and I can give the reasons why and whatnot. But then when I started managing it and like looking around more often, I was like, damn, like except for the power lifters, like the general person, like they'll just go on a cardio machine, go on two like cable machines and go home, and then kind of like come in a couple months later saying like, hey, I'm not really getting results, I'm gonna cancel my membership. And then I get really sad and disappointed. But this constant harping that, oh, squat bench dead all belongs to powerlifters, I think is horrible advice, because like you mentioned, bodybuilders started it. It has a lineage from bodybuilding. It was then abducted and then like forced to be to only for powerlifting. But then one thing I want to say with this also is that when it comes to determining different styles of training, right? If we just constantly like, you know, fractionate, self-segregate and whatnot, and go into these like lanes and camps and whatnot, of that kind of process can just go on infinitely. Oh, I'm a this, but I don't do this. I'm a this and I don't do that. You know, the whole functional fitness kind of crowd is like all CrossFit and everything like that. They just constantly divide among themselves, and then it just makes training even more confusing to the people we're trying to provide information for. But then at the same time, if we don't have any clear guiding principles, we're also just as lost. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, again, two great questions back to back. So let's start with this one. It's interesting because it's a philosophical concept, right? Any type of idea is going to divide itself at some point or the other. And division is necessary for specification so that you know what you're talking about, right? It's the reason why we have language, right? I don't just say, like, for example, I'm looking at it right now because it's coming towards me, but I don't just say feline to speak about a cat, because feline is too broad. So we invented cat, but then you have all of these other substracts of cats, all of these subspecies of cats, and now it becomes overcomplicated. Fitness is the same, meaning that it's important that we understand what we're doing. But the second we start getting into the nitty-gritties, and we, in a sense, segregate within an already existing segregation, now it becomes something that confuses the heck out of people. So for me, we need the concept to remain whole with a clear definition, and we stop there. So for example, what is a bodybuilder? A bodybuilder is someone who trains for aesthetics, right? Who builds the body. He trains for looks. Now, whether you're going to go bear mode, you're going to go twink mode, you're going to be an aesthetic bra, I don't care about that. You're still training for looks. You're a bodybuilder. Then you can slap another word after that, but you're still a bodybuilder first and foremost. So this is what we are. Powerlifters are the same. A tested powerlifter, an equipped powerlifter, a bench-only powerlifter, they're still only powerlifters. So this is, I think, where the distinction can stop, right? After that, it's just up to the individual to decide what they want to be. And then I think that this is also going to prevent people from just losing track of what they really want, which is the danger of power building, because with the comparison we established earlier, with like the two sides of the spectrum pulling you each towards their own center and core, well, I think that powerlifting is much stronger. And you talked about that. You said that your fire was ignited by powerlifting. And that's because powerlifting is an objective sport, meaning that it's clear cut. You know exactly when you progress, it's on the bar, you can write it down. It's incredibly gratifying as a sport because it just makes sense. It speaks to the scientific mind that we all have inside of our brain. Bodybuilding doesn't have that power. Bodybuilding is really just up to interpretation, and therefore it loses in the face of powerlifting completely. So the black hole that is powerlifting compared to bodybuilding will suck people in. And now you're going to have, again, your big three, your big lifts, and then your accessories, like even just the term accessories. Why do powerlifters call it an accessory to do like front raises or lateral raises? It's because it doesn't matter that much. It's like 1%, but for us, it's maybe 20%. It's more important for us. And yet bodybuilders, me included, still call it an accessory. Why? Because we use the terms that powerlifters use, because we're still in a sense taking after them. And as you said, it's because of the abduction. At some point, powerlifting took over, and I can explain that because of the overabundance of drug use in pro bodybuilding. So the average person just gave up on it entirely. All of the methods and the training principles were recuperated by powerlifters that are much smaller than bodybuilders for the most part, and therefore the average person also started to look at that first and foremost, and they became the authority. And nowadays we're dealing with this situation where young men are going to want to look better, They'll train like powerlifters, they'll over-focus on their big three, and they won't understand why they're not looking better.
Yeah, and like I like that you mentioned like drug use, because I really do think that when, you know, when drug use and everything like that, I feel like bodybuilding just got frozen in time. Like it wasn't, because drug use just totally blurred the lines of, well, is this effective absence of the drugs? It's like, well, we don't know because drugs are there. Like it was just so inseparable for the most part from competitive bodybuilding and everything like that. Like with the exception of, you know, the naturals who were in the gyms quietly keeping their head down and working out, like that kind of thing just wasn't really getting out there as much. So good bodybuilding content was just completely frozen in time. Like for example, when I was getting into the gym, the reason why, like what burned me was the Jeff Side and six-pack shortcuts era of like YouTube fitness. It's like, all right, I'm doing my 4 sets of 10 to 20 on nothing but lateral raises, front raises, and all that kind of stuff, and didn't really give me as much of a result of, let's say, doing overhead pressing and then all that kind of stuff. But then eventually, you know, you have to have some level of both, but you don't know that when you're young. You don't know how to properly mix things up. And then when you just realize, like, you know what, they're dumb, they're on drugs, you just leave it behind, and then that only furthers a problem of bodybuilding not able to progress and like become smarter. So that's at least what my observation.
I think it's perfectly sound and valid, because it's a point that I hear more and more naturals make, because I think we're starting to become unafraid. There used to be a time where drug users were so prevalent, and especially in bodybuilding, that even naturals sort of bowed their heads because they didn't want any trouble. Well, I want some trouble, right? I want something to brew a bit, because the situation is intolerable as it is right now. It is a truth that drug use makes people stupid, and it leads people to give bad advice, because when you're on drugs, yes, you'll still have to train. I mean, you can still gain muscle without training, but the top level pros still train, of course. But the issue is that if you put the two in like a scale, which one is more important, the training or the drugs? Well, let's see. Take away their training and look at what happens to their physique. Take away the drugs, look at what happens to their physique. To take away the drugs, these guys, and it's been done a billion times, look at the retired pro bodybuilders, they look like they've never picked up a weight in their life. So clearly the results didn't come from the training, it came from the drugs. But the problem is that these same guys are going to become the authorities on the ability to build muscle because they're the biggest, and therefore they're going to give advice to naturals, and it's terrible advice. But they don't realize it because they keep gaining mass. But I think it's because they've just lost sight of what was happening. They lost sight of where their gains came from, even though they started taking drugs because they wanted additional gains. So it's that situation that we have now there where people are waking up very slowly. I still see pro bodybuilders get millions of views on videos where they give terrible advice. That also speaks to the fact that the average person doesn't understand lifting. Like you've noticed yourself managing gyms where the average normie is going to do like completely ineffective things, get no result, and be surprised because they don't understand. But I think more and more people are waking up to it.
Yeah, definitely. And I do like how you mentioned, like when it comes to like bodybuilding channels and everything like that, they get so much views, attention, subscribers, and everything like that. But like if you look at their subscribers, they tend to be people who are fans, but they're never really like in the trenches. They never really dig deep in their own training. They just kind of like, you know, like all the memes that we make about like ineffective training and like being on your phone and like, you know, 8 dudes with the same haircut all around one single bench that only has like 1 plate on it, like all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to a lot of these things, like I feel like, you know, the idea of like the bigger the, like, this is a horrible thing to reference, but the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. Like,
I mean, it's the truth.
It
Psychologically,
is, yeah.
it's the truth. I mean, tests have been ran on people where if you go up to them on the street and you try to offer them something for free, for example, they won't buy it. But if you say it's exorbitant and very expensive, they'll think, oh, it's rare, so they'll buy it. This speaks to the facility that exists in this food to scam people. And it also means that a lot of pro bodybuilders are going to be able to like market up their product. They make a bigger lie, and it's going to just work because, well, the average person, as you said on these channels, they don't really lift. They're there to observe and to adore. And it's something that I think started with the golden era, where I did some research because I'm planning a documentary on Arnold at some point, and I was looking intently at the crowd of the people at the bodybuilding shows that were looking up at Arnold. And I realized one thing. all of these guys were not lifters. So what exactly are they doing there? Well, I think that what they're doing is they're living their dreams through another man. And the thing is that back in the days, like in the early 2000s, early 1900s, sorry, the crowd was entirely different. The crowd as a show for strongman, for example, was a bunch of dudes interested in strength. They were strong themselves. A crowd of a wrestling match was wrestlers, people who wanted to see the pinnacle of their sport and be inspired. If you transfer that to today, look at the crowd at like a UFC fight. It's a bunch of people who are like skinny fat, of dad bods, etc. Why? They live their masculinity and their dreams of being big and strong through another man. And this is across the board. The problem is because people don't put in the work anymore. They'll rather just look at someone else do it.
And I like that you mentioned, like, not willing to put in the work, because I think that's another reason why people like power building. Oh, I'm a power builder, I'm in between. So when I do my squats, bench, and deadlifts and it's very mediocre, I can say like, well, my bodybuilding stuff is holding me back, or vice versa. Like, you're not really that buff, bro. It's like, oh, no worry. I mean, I'm mainly training for strength right now. So like you said, you get this cop out. But one thing I want to get your thoughts on is, like, could power building just be then a gateway? So powerlifting and bodybuilding being two different and distinct training methods, and a person who chases one will inevitably get some amount of the other. So if you do powerlifting, which is why a lot of novices, they make most of their beginner gains on a novice powerlifting program, it's not sustainable long term and whatnot, but they do get size as a result. And then if someone were to do more bodybuilding stuff, their strength potential does go up, at least in my opinion. And then if someone has been convinced to pursue powerlifting to achieve the physique that they want, they will inevitably be disappointed. And as a result, they kind of wake up, power building kind of like comes into the fray. And it's a useful tool to kind of, take what's useful and discard what's not. There's a lot of methods that come from powerlifting that, like you mentioned, are not good for bodybuilding. Deloads being a prime example. Hypertrophy blocks, like block training for bodybuilding, is just not useful at all, because your entire training is a hypertrophy block. But there's a lot of things that I feel like gets cut out completely when people are like, oh, powerlifting is not good for size, let me just go away.
Oh. Yeah, well, it's the absence of nuance that I think is killing this platform as well, killing the entire wood, but this platform in particular, where we are always just here or there. There can be no middle ground. So people are either going to tell you, okay, bodybuilding equals powerlifting, it's the exact same thing, or they'll tell you, no, it's completely different. So anything a powerlifter does, we can't do. So they won't do compounds, they won't do progressive overload, and therefore they'll get no results whatsoever. I think that all of that again stems from the almost colonial level domination that powerlifting has, where it's either you exist with it or against it. You're either an ally to it or an enemy. And we need to do away from that, right? Powerlifting is not the enemy, but they're not our masters either, right? We are equals, we do our own thing. So we're going to take whatever works and we're going to just stick to it. Bodybuilding in reality is a copycat sport, because we look at the wood and every time there is a function or a motion that is going to produce hypertrophy, we're going to take it. So what an arm wrestler does, you might have to discard 95%, but that 5% remaining might be good for forearm and for bicep. Something that a calisthenic athlete does, you don't want to have skinny legs, you don't want to hyper focus on body weight, you might take some of what they do and actually use it because it grows your muscle. It's in reality the process of picking and choosing, something that we've always done, because if you go back in the past again, bodybuilders were very crafty people. They always found ways to build muscle, always. And I think that today, because there is an overabundance of information and of methods as well, of all of these machines, all of these lifts in reality, well, it has created the opposite. People are not curious anymore. They are not going to research. They're going to stick to things, even if they don't work.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, I remember watching a video that recently came out from Alexander Bromley, where, like, bodybuilders like feet up benching, spoto pressing, and all those kind of things. Like, from my understanding, those came from bodybuilding, right?
I'm not certain on this, so I'm not going to say anything that I'm going to regret in the future, but I know for a fact that the person that invented the bench press was someone who at the time was a strong man and someone who cared also about developing his body. He invented the bench press as a feat of strength to impress people, but also because he had seen that the average physique at the time was lacking in the chest development. This Bronze era bodybuilding was the era of very big limbs, defined core, but very mediocre chest, and it's because they lacked the ability to progressively overload on pushing motions. So he invented the bench press. So any type of bench press variations is valid for bodybuilding.
Okay, nice. So then one thing I have as a question then, so like power building then as a gateway, do you think that's like probably the only useful thing it has then? Because then it just doesn't, it allows people to not just completely get rid of what they have, but then can move on. As long as like power building is not something that you can just stay with, it's something you have to move on from and move through. What do you think about that?
If you're the type of person that started with like a 5x5, like a pure powerlifting program for novices, it is true that if you are tossed directly into the deep sea of intermediate bodybuilder level programs, you might drown because there's going to be too much volume. You're going to start hitting muscles you've never hit before. Like, for example, if you want to freak out a novice, make them do like real delt isolation. They'll think they got injured because the sensation in the delt and the soreness for a long time feels like a rotator cuff injury, but it's not. It's just that you finally isolated a muscle that got no love whatsoever. So this could be, as a result of the powerlifting domination, an issue. So if someone wants to transition and bridge from powerlifting to bodybuilding and they want to make a pit stop at powerbuilding, some people on the platform make good powerbuilding programs. I think, for example, of Jeff Nippert, meaning that even though I think powerbuilding is idiotic, if someone managed to do something good with the concept, it's him. The Kaizen program, as you said, is bad because it's basically a bunch of people who focus on strength, who try to apply the principles of powerlifting to bodybuilding, and it simply doesn't work. But for powerbuilding, if you're going to still focus on your compounds and start slowly introducing isolation, it's a good idea. At one point, you're going to be able to emancipate yourself from that and start doing something proper, which is a proper bodybuilding program.
Yeah, definitely. And then back to that though. So when it comes to that, so then that kind of like introduced me to my next line of thinking, which is, well, once you kind of get to that point, power building just has defeated itself. Because once you start giving clear guidelines, once you start moving into, all right, so you kind of like fall out of love, fall out of favor, whatever, and then decide to go into a more bodybuilding route, you're now a bodybuilder. Like you might use specific movements, but hypertrophy is not exercise specific. But then let's say, my main goal is strength, my main goal is powerlifting, then like when you have to enter your hypertrophy blocks, your level of specificity does matter to an extent. But like I said, so when you have power building kind of in the mix and you give a clear distinction, like, okay, what is the goal? You have now eliminated half of the equation. You have now like essentially destroyed so much of it, because when it comes to size and strength, the intersection between these two things, they don't create a third variable, at least not in my opinion, which is why when you have this mix of powerlifting and bodybuilding, you're not making one thing that I started realizing to myself is like, I'm not making a new style of training. I'm just becoming closer to one style of training. But so when I started thinking about it, like, what if power building is anything, what is it? I just said that hypertrophy training is not exercise specific, but if I start including exercise specificity to it, that's a personal choice. It's not a different training philosophy. It does take some different things into consideration, but it by itself does not just make a whole new thing. For example, with MMA, right? Someone doing boxing and wrestling, they're not making a new martial art. It just becomes a mixed martial art. Someone who's kind of in the middle of, let's say, believing whatever their sibling has taught them, like they have two different siblings teaching them two different things, and they're somewhere in the middle. They don't just create a whole new third identity out of the blue. Like, you incorporating both isn't just something like that. It's a bit more closer to like self-actualizing yourself and like becoming a bit more well-rounded. So once I kind of started thinking like that, I was like, damn, like my whole thing just kind of fell apart. Because anything where I kind of try to make power building a bit more legitimate, I just make it look more and more like one or the other. That's kind of like my observation. But what do you think about that?
I think that this is incredibly smart. And if you haven't made a video about that yet, I encourage you to do it, because you're touching on a very subtle idea. And that is the idea that any type of system that functions as a binary that tries to exist outside of the binary will always fall back into it. And it goes way beyond lifting. We're not going to get into that because it's not the discussion today, but if you look at the wood nowadays, you have a bunch of people who are trying their best and their hardest to extirpate themselves from a binary system that they perceive to be restrictive. And when you listen to them and they're like, okay, I'm not in the binary, I'm this, it always boils down to them actually falling back into it. And you can tell them, well, you just made a category that can only exist because it's defined by the binary it came from. So you're still in the binary. And that's that powerlifting and bodybuilding, again, discussion we just had, you just discussed as well. The more you're going to try to define power building, the more you're going to try and make an identity out of that, the more you'll realize that it's either that you are creating a new style of training that is just pertaining to you and is not a new category at all, it's just a new type of bodybuilding or powerlifting, or you're just doing bodybuilding or powerlifting. You're just being drawn back towards one of these two sides of the spectrum again. It's nothing new. And this is also why powerbuilding is as a marketing tool was efficient, but as a training method wasn't. It was people who wanted to create something fresh because they realized that powerlifting was becoming stale, bodybuilding was still out of style because it wasn't trusted anymore. So they were like, okay, best of both worlds, building and power. There you are, something new. Then you look at the method and you're like, well, that's nothing new, right? You just took the leftovers of the fridge and you put it in a pot. It doesn't mean that they're not the leftovers anymore. You just made a dish that is going to be palatable now. Is it going to be good for my health or tasteful? Maybe, but for the most part, it fails entirely. And this brings it back at the end of the day to the individual. I know people who call themselves power builders. I look at their programs and I'm like, no, you're a bodybuilder, right? Just because you do your compounds and your isolation doesn't make you a new species. You are still a bodybuilder. Don't try to extirpate yourself or emancipate yourself from the big family of bodybuilding. You're still in the binary and you're much closer to my side than to powerlifters. So if you want results, maybe take that into account and leave that identity as it is.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because I was like struggling with the question, like, is a size and strength hybrid its own lane? You know, like, are there things that kind of like happen with that? But then I thought it to myself, well, a proper bodybuilder, they manage these two things. So, and then even a proper powerlifter, like, they know that, like, eventually they can't arch their way to a 600-pound bench. Like, looking at Dan Green, like, he was like, I just need to build every single muscle involved as big as it possibly can to help me on the platform. So he just had to think to himself, all right, I'm going to make everything as big as possible. But then when that kind of happens, right, you're only building prime movers. So while I think Dan Green has a very impressive physique, it's not really going to be what you can expect from someone who's just like, okay, I'm going to enter in a hypertrophy block for my strength. They'll just focus on their prime movers. You're not going to see them do ladder raises. You're probably not going to see them do upright rows. You're not going to see them train calves, which is something you barely see anyway. But when it comes to that size strength hybrid, that's just something that, whether you're a bodybuilder, like, that's what a bodybuilder has to manage, because they do need to have progression. They do need to make sure that they are over time getting stronger than at least when they were before. And then when it comes to powerlifting, you can't just train specifically all the time. Like, upcoming video I have on my list is kind of like, specificity is killing your gains, because when you just train year after year, squat, bench, dead, squat, bench, dead, squat, bench, dead, and then you only do the competition lifts and you never really like give yourself the opportunity to go outside of it. I'm like, dude, your technique is fine. You've been practicing it all this time, but like, the things that you can do better for you right now is all these other things. So that way you're not injured all the time. You're not getting sick all the time. You're not you're not feeling beat up as a result of your training all the time. It's like, oh, powerlifting so like, you know, hard on the joints. It's like, my brother, you made the program. Like,
yeah.
So that's why when I started thinking like that, I was like, damn, power building really is like, it's a launching off point from my perspective now. It's not a new way of training. It's literally just you realizing, you know what, the more you want one or the other, the more you have to really think to yourself that your answer is not in the middle. It's actually is established somewhere else. And one thing that I kind of thought about recently, where I was kind of like having a hiccup in my willingness to use a term, was the idea that, am I unintentionally promoting a bigger distinction between size and strength? So am I making it seem like, oh, these are two very different things that when you mix them, they become something new? when in reality it's like they're two shades of the same color. They're and by making power building a legitimate thing, am I just saying like, okay, strength is its own separate realm and size is its own separate realm, and then we can converge the two? But then in reality, I don't really buy into that, because I just think that no, you become more akin to another.
Yeah, because the danger in this is that someone like you wouldn't do it on purpose, but a ton of bodybuilders nowadays do it. Well, they'll tell you, no, don't even care about strength, it doesn't matter, because it fits with the way they train, right? They go for the pump and they'll tell you progressive overload doesn't work. Why? Well, because they can get results regardless, but the average natural will not. What the difference is going to be is mostly the mindset and reality, right? We use the same tools. It's something that I like to say a lot, is that to me, bodybuilders and powerlifters are brothers. We live in the same building, but we're not living in the same apartment. And that's fine, that's great. We don't want to be roommates, because when we're roommates, things just don't go well. We can't cohabit that well, but we're going to use the same bathroom, and that bathroom is named strength. The difference is that, and it's a difference of approach. A bodybuilder will want to have an increase in strength to be able to have an increase in hypertrophy, whereas a powerlifter will want the opposite. They'll want more hypertrophy to get more strength. And this is why you see that focus on prime movers, for example, where if you look at an hypertrophy block, like from an Olympic weightlifter, what is the hypertrophy block? Oh, you're going to do block pulls, you're going to do like front squats, you're going to do 8 reps on the squat. Wow, that's still a compound movement, but why do they do it? Well, it's because it works. Anyone who tells you, oh, for my hypertrophy block to become a better bencher, I'm going to do curls, well, that person is an idiot, because that's not a prime mover of the bench. So it's not going to work. But that approach of specificity, as you said, can become a poison for people, especially if it wasn't what you wanted to do in the first place. And then you'll have a program that's just the declination of the big three. Most powerlifting programs are like that. Why? Well, because it serves their purpose. But for a bodybuilder, you're just going to end up with a completely unbalanced physique. And that's because bodybuilding is the focus on form, but paradoxically also the freedom from form, meaning that we don't have to espouse a method. Whatever you do, if it results in hypertrophy, it works. That means that it's a bodybuilding method. Powerlifting doesn't work like that. There's not a billion ways to skin a cat. Most high-level powerlifters have the same approach with like very small differences. It's why also there is drama in powerlifting, don't get me wrong, but it's like, it's them splitting hair, or they'll discuss very specific things, and you see that with West Side against like the raw lifters who say it doesn't work, etc. As a bodybuilder, it always cracks me up, because it does look like two siblings having a discussion and having an argument, because they agree with like most things. So they're going, the few nitty-gritties they don't agree with, they're going to hyper-focus on that. As a bodybuilder, we are not as restricted in a sense, which also means that there isn't really a discussion with bodybuilding, meaning that once your focus is aesthetics and you have methods that you can prove work for aesthetics, we're going to stop there. And if you try to mix that mindset with the mindset of a powerlifter, you get a being that has two brains now. And the issue is that one brain is going to take over the other. The scientific brain is always going to beat the artistic brain because it has objectivity on its side. So that's the thing with power building as well. It's two divorced parents that are trying to take care of the kid. You're the kid, but one of the parents is going to have much more sway. And that's the powerlifting side of the entire spectrum.
Interesting. And then one thing I wanted to get your thoughts on is kind of like when people say you're like the person who chases two rabbits catches neither, or the jack of all trades kind of argument. For me, like when it comes to bodybuilding, you're training for aesthetic, right? You are trying to build the body that you yourself want. At least that's kind of like my understanding and my kind of thing with it. I do want to have a body that does look good in my own mind, but I also wanted to be able to do certain things. So I would still consider that like, well, that's still more in line of like bodybuilding, because you're building the body that you want. Even if that there's a somewhat of a performance aspect to it, it's still, there's the act of you doing something is still part of your own aesthetic, at least in my understanding. So with me saying I want to be as strong as possible while being at, for me, a certain weight and trying to get down to a certain level of body fat, to me, that's like my form of bodybuilding. And that isn't two rabbits, it's one. You're like, when you make very clear distinctions as to where the borders are as far as like your conditions. So let's say, for example, like a powerlifter does this, in my opinion, I want to be as strong as possible in my weight class. if you just say, I want to be as strong as possible, you can go like bloat Lord Max and like, you know, literally make yourself a human like blob of just meat, mass, muscle, and power. And then boom, you're going to be as strong as humanly possible. Or you can set a condition and then from right there, that's where you like maximize your strength. And that's one rabbit, not two. And then on with the other part of it, the jack of all trades argument, which is something that I feel kind of is kind of dubious in a way, or like devious, because it never gives credence to the other half of that saying. Like a jack of all trades is a master of none, but is often better than a master of one. And I feel like we kind of like get away from that. We are so unwilling to pick and choose that we feel like we need to be, no, this is the one thing, this is the one rabbit I'm going to chase, this is the one, this is it. But then when you have that, you are essentially saying that you are now an artist, you are now able to create what you want. And then this is like, you know, when he said like reclaim your name, you're a bodybuilder. I think that's where that comes in. You are a bodybuilder, you have your conditions, you have what you want to achieve and what you want to look like. Own up to that. And then it's a very scary thing, in my opinion, to be a bodybuilder for the same reason that a lot of people get into powerlifting. You need to work on your diet. So this is like my segue into dieting and all that kind of stuff, because it's something that I personally struggle with and need to work on. But I do think that when you have a cop out, you know, weight classes and, you know, I'm just trying to get strong, you use it as a way to justify your unhealthiness. Like, oh my God, these bag of chips are totally going to make my bench press workout like so much better next time. And then you justify it in that way. And then you continue this bad eating process. But when you kind of like adopt a lineage of, you know, glory, essentially, like bodybuilding, you start to realize, damn, this is incompatible with a good bodybuilding lifestyle. I should be sleeping more. I mean, you should be doing that with powerlifting too. But, you know, if you really want to maximize your growth, like where's your hydration at? Where's your sleep at? Where's your diet at? Like there's so many outside of the gym things that I feel like bodybuilders have a better grasp on than most powerlifters do, because they just think to themselves, I went to the gym, I got stronger, I'm a good powerlifter. Whereas with bodybuilding and being a more responsible trained lifter in general, I actually think bodybuilders have that better down the line, because they recognize that, oh, bodybuilding, it's a lifestyle thing. Like, you know, that whole like it's a lifestyle kind of thing. I kind of heard that more so from the bodybuilding side, but they have a point and they kind of have that better understanding. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, I really want to commend you because I appreciate the work you put in the questions, because they're insanely good and also complex to the point that I'm sure we're going to miss some things, but we're going to try and be as concise and as, in a sense, conclusive as possible on this point. So first thing, for the diet part, you're right. It's true that there's that massive difference between powerlifting and bodybuilding, meaning that powerlifting is something you do, bodybuilding is something you are, right? It's a state of existence between an action. You can be a powerlifter in the gym and on the platform, and outside of it not be one. It's not going to be as detrimental. It's still, the top powerlifters still live it. You have to live it. Mm-hmm. But as a bodybuilder, if it's not everything you do, you're going to fail. And then you get into the vicious part of that, where pro bodybuilders say it's a lifestyle, which means you breathe, sleep, and shit bodybuilding, but now it becomes toxic because you start doing only that. You become a gym seller in a sense. Mm-hmm. Your life is the gym, but the issue is that you started lifting to improve yourself outside of the gym and to have a better life. So now it's a self-defeating thing that you have done. You have reduced yourself to a being that is a slave to the gym, and that's not good. I know I fell into that trap. I also fell into the trap that you described of eating more and more and more, getting stronger and thinking, okay, I'm doing things right. But the issue is that my condition and my body composition was total garbage. And many people, many young lifters, sadly, who get put on starting strength, fall into that trap. Well, they're told that the premise is, here is your program. If you get stronger on this program, you are doing well. So they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to do exactly what old Uncle Rippleto told me. So what they do is they go mad, they eat a ton, they get a ton of fat, they get stronger. So everything is going according to plan, right? Well, no, because now what they did is they just got a bigger body that moves bigger weights. Yes, they progressed in muscle mass. There's no actual problem with that. But is it what they wanted? I guarantee you that 90% of people who start starting strength didn't want that. So they got segued into becoming a shitty powerlifter at that, because most of them never get really strong. And now they are in a position where they don't have what they want. And now they are much further away from what they want, because now they have to clean up their diet. They build up terrible habits, training habits as well. And now it's super hard to go back. I ballooned up to 240 before I realized, okay, what I'm doing is stupid. My health is garbage. I'm constantly injured and I'm not even strong. So what even am I doing? And it took a long time for me to go back to 210. And still to this day, I'm digging through the fat I accumulated. I've been recomping for 3 years, all for the past mistakes I've made because I wasn't focused. Now, this is, before we segue into diet entirely, because it's going to be a good discussion as well, this also speaks to the artistic approach to bodybuilding, right? Because you could say, oh, we're artists, so specificity, function doesn't matter. Well, as someone who knows artists, the methods matter just as much as the expression. If you want to paint something, you have to have the technique. You want to represent the human body, you have to have the proportions down to pat. You can't just wing it. Being an artist is not just expressing yourself. And this is where, and I'm going to conclude with that, this is where bodybuilding mixes size and strength. Strength is the method we're going to use. It's the lifts we're going to espouse to sculpt the body. We can't just think, I want to be bigger and it's going to happen. No, you have to find a way there. And that way is going to be strength and increase in strength. But the artist, the person that is going to paint the human body, isn't an anatomist. His goal is not to be perfectly precise. He wants to get just enough technique to be able to then express what he thinks the human body must look like. And that's when you become an actual bodybuilder.
Yeah, I really like that point, because one thing that people always like mistake is like, if you want to make the best work of art, you don't just like give someone a brush and say, do you, like, just do whatever you want. You tell them, here are your restrictions. Creativity needs restrictions. So I really do like that point. And then when it comes to like the trap that we both fell into, that's kind of what I'm going into right now, because one thing that I started realizing the past couple of years, right? Natural lifting, takes a long ass time. So I always had this theory, this inclination in my mind that, you know what, natural training takes so long that there's gonna be this big gap. We're gonna go through this phase of content where the people who are making content like are all the druggies and all that kind of stuff, and people who are kind of mediocre for the most part, but then they're like slowly inching towards something real, and then we finally get a huge collection of natural lifters who are just impressive as hell. And I think that kind of just happened, because when I look at people like Bald Omni Man, for example, and Alphadestiny, these guys are strong as hell, lean as hell, look good, and all that kind of stuff, right? And they're not fat. So then I thought to myself, why the fuck am I ballooning up to get that number when you can get it lean? And then when I kind of realized that, I was like, all right, let's be a bit honest with myself and kind of like soul search and like make some changes in my life. So that was a really great point. And yeah, definitely, like, so diet is something that I actually don't talk about too much on my channel, because I've just made, yeah, like it's difficult too, especially, like barring any laws, right? For me, it's difficult because, I still struggle with it. Why? Like, I can, give notes about things that I do that kind of help and everything like that. But for the most part, I only know 2 states of existence, and I'm working on the 3rd right now. I only know like extreme dietary changes. So I did for like about 6 months to 10 months, 1 meal a day. That's all I did. I did 1 meal a day. It was grilled fish with baby bok choy, a plate of rice, and then some walnuts. Like, that was my 1 meal. And I did that for 6 months, 6 to 10 months. I forget the exact timeline, but I know I did it for almost an entire year. And then I would have 1 cheat meal either once a week or every 2 weeks. I can do really well with extreme like protocols like that, but I'm not comfortable at all saying that that's what someone should do. Like, and I'm not even comfortable with myself trying to make my lifestyle accommodate that. So when it comes to dietary content, I almost stay away from it, because I'm still just a student with it. I'm still like a kindergartner with it, still trying to like figure it all out. When did you start feeling that your diet had like some good, like, just like there's a good roadmap to it, good structure to it, something that you could reliably do over time?
All right. So before answering that, I have 3 small points I want to cover. First off, you just made me realize one thing. The reason why I believe that modern art and contemporary art is garbage is because they've done away with discipline. So they tell people, oh, just express yourself. But if you don't have the method, you're not going to be able to express your true self, and it's going to be terrible art. 2, you cited Alphadestiny and Bald Omni Man. I think that these guys are key, because even though their method might still be more inclined towards strength, they shot a bullet in the entire power copper theory of all of these people that got fat as heck and got mediocre benches, all of these idiots that got to like 280 to bench 3 plates. Then you got Alphadestiny and Bold Omni Man pressing 4 plates with abs. And they're like, all right, well, you just ruined your health for no reason whatsoever, because these guys have proved you can look good and be strong at the same time if it's something that you wish. And I know that this is a mindset that resonates with a lot of people. It's the reason why they're both popular and their methods both create results. It's because it works. So they're doing a good job on that. And then the third part, this diet part, to introduce the discussion around my diet, I think that training is like politics and diet is like religion. It's the reason why sharing your diet and trying to spread it and say this applies to everyone is idiotic, whereas it's much more acceptable for politics because it's something that is not as personal. It's why I reframed from talking about diet as well, because just like religion, your view on God and spirituality is going to constantly evolve with time, much less than politics. Politics, people are like set in stone, and I know I'm like that. I'm like, here, this is what is right. For diet, I've been changing so much. Like, it's an exclusivity for your channel. I've almost stopped eating animal products, meaning that 2 years ago, I made a video talking about my diet, and I said, I try to eat as many vegetables as I can, but I still eat animal products. Nowadays, I'm down to, I don't eat beef, I don't eat pork, I don't eat processed meats anymore. The only type of animal products I eat is goat cheese, honey, and I eat some fish and some turkey. The vast majority of the rest is plants. And if you had told me 5 years ago I would get to that, I would have told you, no way in hell, it's not possible. Animal products are absolutely necessary for bodybuilding and for size. And I found that it's not true because my view on diet has evolved with my practice. So nowadays, the way I see diet is this again. I used to be just like you. Extremes, extremes, extremes. I was the guy that ate 12 eggs a day. I would make myself 2 pounds of pasta and eat it all at once and want to puke because you have to eat to gain mass, right? Or you have to be big, blah, blah, blah. All of this nonsense in reality. And then I would do extreme cuts when I would eat spinach and a glass of water and dark chocolate. Well, that doesn't work. That doesn't produce good results. It's the bulking and cutting cycle. It's the bulking and cutting purgatory that people are stuck into, that people have been stuck into for 10 years. I know people that gain and cut the same 15 pounds every single season. They bulk in winter, they cut in summer, and then they wonder why they look like shit, and they talk about natural limit. It's because they're misusing the principles of bulking and cutting. Weight manipulation is absolutely necessary for bodybuilding because that's the name of the game. You want to be bigger, you want to shape the body. When you make a statue, the overall weight of the statue fluctuates as you sculpt it. It doesn't remain the same. If it remained the same, it would still be a dumb rock. So it must be done. But if you come to the statue with a hammer and you start to hammer the arms off, it's not sculpture anymore. You fucked up. And it's that balance that I've started to actually regain. And the more balanced I am, the more freedom I have, the less restraint I have, the less of an eating disorder I develop because I finally feel like I can breathe. So many people feel like oppressed by their diet where I have to eat this at this time or I can't eat this. No, look at what works and realize that it's a word of flexibility. It's like religion. It's your personal approach. It's not a one size fits all thing. Any type of diet that tells you, oh, this works for everyone is a terrible diet. Your diet is the one you're going to discover for yourself.
I really like your like politics and religion dichotomy with that because, and it's even funnier when like I just have this thought like, you know, people think they have to eat this or eat at this time because someone told them to, because like, you know, people live like some people like, oh, my pastor told me this, so I need to live just like that or else I'm going to hell. And then obviously hell is like, you know, not being healthy, not looking the way you want to. So yeah, I really do appreciate everything you've kind of like had, like being able to bounce my ideas back off on you because you know you're like incredibly like intelligent guy, like me finding your channel through the Educated Barbarian and then looking at the title of your channel and just thinking to myself like, that doesn't make sense. Why is this guy with natural hypertrophy making such great book reviews? And it's like, then boom, like whole summer just sank into your your content. So really do appreciate that. How are we on time? Like,
we are pretty good. I mean, for me, right now I had something else come up, so I have 40 extra minutes I can give you if you want.
Oh, perfect, man. Really do appreciate that. So I have some other questions if you're comfortable with them, because I know you want to keep some level of anonymity. I think that's how you pronounce that. I don't know.
Mhm.
Sometimes my English comes out. Uh, so one thing I wanted to ask you is this. Like, when was the last time you were presently surprised with the fitness channel? Like for the content that they're making, like the kind of the character behind the camera, and before you started making videos. So like, I know you made your channel like in late 2019, like I think at the very end of 2019, and then like after. So now that you've like, you know, being, I know you're a humble guy, so it's kind of like you can kind of think to yourself like, I might have had a influence on people coming after me versus before. So what are channels that you are surprised by, I guess?
So to answer your question, before I started making videos, I was watching a ton of YouTube fitness, and the more my channel grew, the less I was watching, because I think that when you become a creator, it's important to try to have your own flair. I think that people come to my channel to listen to me, so I don't want to be tainted in a sense by others. But it's also important to like stay level with the principles and concepts that are being put out there. So I still follow a ton of channels, I watch a ton of videos. Before I made the channel proper, I wasn't really happy with YouTube Fitness at all. I can be honest with you, where my hope and appreciation for the platform was dwindling every single year. But after the creation, something happened. And I'm sure that many people can attest to that, because I think there has been a revolution of sorts. I'm not going to pretend to be the head of the revolution, because it's not true. But a guy that started at the same time as I did, almost the same time, is Geoff from Geoffrey Verity Scofield. And we grew at the same rate. Now, he exploded in popularity, and that's excellent. But I think we started a new movement. I think we started to bring back natural lifting to where it was supposed to be, with good quality content, information at the center of our channels, and also a personality that is going to make people adhere to the entire idea that it's possible to become big naturally. And with that, many more people started to come after. So Bold Omni-Man, for example, who is someone who started his channel, I think a year or year and a half after mine, and who also blew up. This guy also is part of that movement. I don't know if you watch One Piece, but in One Piece, there is the terrible generation. It's the supernovas, and they're
Yeah.
called that because they challenge the established order. When I started my channel, that's what I wanted to do. I saw that things were not going the way they were supposed to go. People were not being given the information they deserved, and so I decided to make a change. But I also knew intimately that I wasn't going to be able to do it by myself. So I hoped that other people would join, and other people did join. People who do things that I can't do, who do things better than I do them. And it's the only way we're going to be able to win. It's to have a plethora of natural channels that are going to have different methods, different people, because we don't have the same minds, thank God, but who all work towards the same direction. We have the same goal in mind, that is to educate people, to help people. So to answer your question, I was starting to lose hope, but now I'm full of hope, because I've seen what has happened, and I also see the up and comers. I see the guys starting channels now. Well, they might have a few thousand subs, but in a year they'll have 10,000, then 50,000, etc. And we're going to grow the community like this. This is how you grow community, and I think that we have planted the seeds. This is the beginning. And the seeds are going to blossom. We're going to have a great, beautiful tree, and that tree is going to be natural lifting. Now, whether you want to pick the fruit of natural powerlifting or natural bodybuilding, natural strongman, it doesn't matter to me. At the end of the day, you'll finally get what you deserved, because the fruit had been dried up and now it's rebirthed.
Yeah, definitely. One guy I want to kind of mention and who I started interacting with recently is the Basement Bodybuilding. Like I didn't realize this was his first video because, but like I was making a video talking about something that Eugene Tao had said, like, you know, like why I don't do barbell lifts and why you shouldn't either. And I was just like, oh God, all right, here, we're gonna have this discussion again. And then like while I was kind of like putting together my notes, I get recommended, because you know YouTube algorithms just reading your mind all the time, a video with less than 100 views with a anatomy chart that said the big three are overrated. So I was like, all right, we're throwing this one in there too. I watched the video. I was like, fuck, this guy has a point. And like, he's like incredibly smart and everything. That I was like, and he was just like humble guy. And I was like, all right, there's something to this. And I really do think that there has been a revolution of sorts where the kind of content that we're getting now is just much more useful. And I am indeed a huge One Piece fan. I binged it over an entire summer. I'm caught up to it right now, and that was a bit of a, like, I think Wano was great and everything like that, but everything that led up to it was a bit of a slog for me personally as a Zoro fan. But
Okay, yeah, I can get
like,
that.
like just years of without him, I was just kind of rough. But anyway, like I do think that we're starting to fill in the ranks of like you said, the worst generation, but really the best one, where like there's a bunch of supernovas, and like yeah, definitely like the seeds are being planted, and I do want that's why I put out his content. I recommend his content so much is because I want his channel to grow. Like you're a fan of Nietzsche or Nietzsche. I like you got me saying Nietzsche. Like I almost said it during my presentation. But anyway, but you know how he said, like, there's a reason why the aristocratic class doesn't want to be in charge. They want to select the king for the people, like, so that way they can just like go off and live their merry way. I kind of want to do something similar, quite honestly, where it's just kind of like, like I don't have a big channel, like the biggest channel at all, but I mean, like I had a bigger one at the time. Like, so I was just like, shoot, I like this guy's content. I like what this guy has to say. Let me get him up to where I'm at, and then hope to God that he like blows up even further than I could imagine, because that's what I want. I'm just like I benefit from him having his content in his platform and all that kind of stuff. So I think trying to help that along, and like all like people doing that with the channels and the content that they believe in, is just wonderful. And I think that's what's good about like where we're at right now with YouTube Fitness.
Yeah, that's a shift in mindset, because you would never catch, I mean, you could catch some people say that from YouTube Fitness that will tell you, oh, of course, I want everyone to do well, but that's nonsense. They're being hypocrites.
Yeah.
YouTube Fitness is a game of one. People want to be the boss, the top dog. It's what's always happened. Every time you see a YouTuber plug another channel, there is interest in this. They either got payment, direct payment from the guy, that's more common than people think, or they are scheming. They know that if the guy blows up, they can use them later on to gain popularity themselves. We are the generation to stop that. We are starting to uplift each other. And I think that the person that must be saluted for this is Alphadestiny.
Yeah.
Alphadestiny is the guy that, and it's not new, he's always done it, plugs people on his channel free. He never charges people, because he wants to build a community. Every time he sees someone who he thinks can be of help, he plugs them, no question asked. And he is responsible for the massive boost in momentum that we experienced as the terrible generation. In a sense, One Piece fans are going to be all over this one. He's like the Ray League of this entire thing. He's the guy from like 5 years ago that has the visibility and is not bitter. He's not going to be resentful of the young gains coming up, and he's trying to help as much as he can. And we are the ones coming afterwards. So what you're doing with basement bodybuilding is good as well. What we need the most as the natural community is a lot of channels. The last thing we want is to have one guy that rules the show, because that always goes poorly. We want a bunch of people. So again, to make that comparison, like all of these big bodybuilding pages that give terrible advice are like the 4 emperors of the sea. Like they control their environment, they have their own areas, no one trespasses. Every riches on the territory is theirs. People who live there are their subjects. It's their loyal fanboys. They're not allowed to go anywhere. They rule. Like they're like rulers. They're like kings. We can't be behaving like this. We need to help each other and cooperate as much as possible. In One Piece, in the manga, the terrible generation cooperates, right? They're working together to take down the emperors. They still have their ego. It's important that we still believe in what we preach, because if I'm going to have my methods, I must believe in my methods. But it doesn't mean that I want to overtake someone else. There's no need in that. And this leads to what you said about Nietzsche. The aristocrat versus plebeian state of mind. People would think immediately that the aristocrat wants to take over, but that's not true. The aristocrat has already taken over. What he cares about the most is mastering the self. It's mastering himself first and foremost. So what he will do is, as you said, he will stay away from the political affairs, and he will select a king for the people. He'll still have control, but he's not going to let himself be tainted by the power. That's what's the most important. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. All of these big bodybuilding pages, they started like us, full of dreams, hope. They wanted to help people, but at some point, fame and money corrupts, and you start thinking that you're too big for your britches, and you're too good to be true, and you're a god, and you develop that god complex that I've seen more and more. And this is when you lose your calling, and you're of no help anymore. Now you become dangerous, you become poisonous for the community. I hope, because we're just getting started now, that none of us in the ranks of the noble 90s, for example, will ever fall into that. I hope that if one of us does, the others are going to try and bring him back to the ground, because at some point, one or many of these channels will blow up. But when we do, we must use that popularity to actually help people as much as possible and remain in what we're doing right now, remain in that endless mindset of the one coming after me might be the next big thing. So if he blows up, then all the better. There's no resentment or jealousy there.
Definitely, yeah. So 100% agree in agreement with that. And then going off with the One Piece analogy, there's one thing that kind of came to mind, like this one episode, and it's been a while since I've seen this one. But remember when they're in Mocktown, like before they literally went to the sky.
Yeah.
You know, like people who have high aspirations will always be shat on by the people around them, but it's the people who can withstand it who will be able to then rise above. And I think only people who can fill in those ranks are the people who can kind of sort through that and kind of go through that kind of stuff. So I like One Piece analogies, and I like analogies in general, but that was a good one. So another question I wanted to ask was, since we're already on the topic of anime, how do you feel about this is very strange question, but how do you feel about how a lot of anime protagonists nowadays are just less and less masculine? Like I remember growing up, Goku, Vegeta, Frieza delts, you kind of wanted that. Jotaro in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, part 3, looks incredibly different than how he looked in. Well, he looked still pretty good in 4, he just became an aesthetic bra. But then in the flashback in 5, he was just totally shredded down, and I was just wondering to myself, what's going on there? Where's my Fist of the North Star Kenshiro? Where's my Baki Yujiro Hanma guys? Where's the male power fantasy in anime? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because first off, for all of the JoJo fans, it's true that Araki's style has always been erratic and he always fluctuates. So I'm not going to pin it on him, but I have noticed as well this massive difference between the heroes of when I was young and what the kids have nowadays, where you have all of these Midoriyas, you have all of these characters that are a bit crybabies. And I think that this speaks to what occurred to male power fantasies as a whole. Because if you think about it, and this might be a little bit politically incorrect to say, so maybe you won't want to actually showcase what I'm going to say right now.
Oh, you say it. I like being politically incorrect.
Okay, so what I think happened, and the reason why I think shonen manga was especially prevalent in Japan and why they came up with this and why the neketsu genre was also birthed there, is because they suffered a lot from the defeat of World War II, and the Japanese society as a whole felt oppressed, especially the men, meaning that they were feeling like they couldn't express their powers anymore. And at some point, there needed to be an outburst of that. There needed to be an outlet for that power to restore that dream in the minds of young men. And I think that's when manga came through. You look at Goku, what does Goku do? He protects the Earth, aka Japan, from invaders. He's buff as fuck. He's the one that is going to put himself in the front line, and he always wins. Why? Well, because he cannot lose. If he loses, the Earth is defeated. That, at surface level, is just a guy with yellow hair that screams and says Kamehameha. But on an abstract level, that's what it means. That's what it spoke to the soul of the average Japanese male. And the more you saw the heroes develop, the more this was true. They were always buff, always very strong, very masculine archetypes. But with time, that started to deteriorate. And now you start seeing more sensitive, more feminized archetypes. And it's not a bad thing, but it also means that the generation has shifted. And I think it's sort of, in a sense, a sign that people are starting to give up. And that because we're giving up and we cannot aspire to be these super saiyans anymore, we want something more realistic. And I say it's not a bad thing because these heroes still have value. You have value in Midoriya from My Hero, for example. He's still strong, mentally strong, but it starts from a place that is much more realistic. And I think that the perfect example of that would be Baki, for example. Baki is the mix of two. Baki was a crybaby kid. He was a depressed kid. He was suffering a lot. He wasn't that strong when he started, but at the end of the series, what we are right now, he's a literal human god. He's like a demigod. And it's that evolution that I think makes it more relatable and more realistic than what we used to have.
Yeah, I really I decided that I'm going to read Baki because the first introduction I had to that series was the Netflix adaptation, and we all know how that goes. So I'm gonna read it. But one thing that I wanted to bring up was like that's why I really like Hajime no Ippo. So I already mentioned that I'm a Rocky fan. But when I discovered Hajime no Ippo, like, I expected it to be like, just, action anime and everything like that. But I really liked how they started out with Ippo being this dude who's just bullied. Like, this guy is awkward. He's he's awkward. He's like not social at all. He gets picked on, and then he like, as he's being bullied, he just has this question like, what does it mean to be strong? Like, and then that just kind of like got me really, because like I'm a pretty sensitive kind of guy. But then that whole journey he makes, like every step along the way and everything like that, like I just think that's like so amazing. And there's a lot of like the slogan or tagline on my channel is "Start where you stand." So a lot of my favorite stories are stories like that, where they kind of have this like starting point, and then and then that's where they go off. Like, I think one big mistake where a lot of people happen is that they look at the end result, they look at Super Saiyan, and then they think to themselves, I can't get there, I can't do it. Goku didn't start there. Like, he was just this really like funny kid in the middle of the woods, like, who thought his grandpa was in a ball. Like, you start there. Like, it doesn't matter where you're at. Like, you can be bullied, you could be antisocial, you could be like weak. You can find out what being strong is. And that's what I really like about like a lot of like those kinds of anime. And that can still happen with a lot of the modern ones. Like you mentioned, Midoriya from My Hero, and the other main character, Bakugo, who's my personal favorite from there.
Same.
Good. But like, there's a lot to be learned from there. And like, I do like how you mentioned, like, the male power, or like, the stories that we tell ourselves are ways that we interact with the real world. I mean, like, if you look at like more North American like media, like our superhero content after, the events of 9/11, like, it's changed. It wasn't like this campy like Adam West kind of way of going about things. It was, how can we realistically deal with evil out there in the world? And I don't know, have you seen the most recent Batman movie? No, are you going to?
Maybe someday, yeah.
Okay, then I won't say it. But like, so I don't want to spoil it and take that away from you. But basically, what I liked about it, it was like, it gave a good sense of what heroes in our modern world, and in a not woke way either. Like, what a hero, like, there's some wokeness in it, but whatever. Like, it gave a realistic look about what heroes are in this world. Like, what does it mean to be that? Like, it's not someone who just always saves the day, prevents bad from happening. It's someone who deals with it. It's someone who puts their hand in it and the kind of stuff. So one thing I want to ask, and we could potentially end this depending on like your time, is Kierkegaard. So the reason why I want to bring him up is because there's an idea that he has called the Night of Infinite Resignation. So I'm still kind of like putting together my understanding of it, because his texts are not super clear. Kierkegaard is very famous for using a lot of pseudonyms, so he can like pretend to be someone else to put forward an argument in that person's perspective. And one thing with the Night of Infinite Resignation is this kind of idea that, like, like you mentioned with diet and like being like religion, like, it changes over time. Your faith will be shaken over time, and you go through these ebbs and flows. But eventually, like, when you kind of come to a point in time where rationality ceases to like work or ceases to provide answers, you now have to rely on faith, which is a very scary thing to do. But the Night of Infinite Resignation does so. And he recognizes that while he might not have an answer to the problem of evil, like, like, if God is all good and all knowing and all powerful, why does bad things occur? He recognizes that out of faith, he just has to kind of accept that, or and then, like ourselves, we might not get to the heights of, like, let's say a C-bomb or whatever big bodybuilder who's drugged up and whatnot. We might not get there, but we resign ourselves to our craft. We resign ourselves to our faith, essentially, that if I put in the work, I'm going to get something out of it. So I guess what I wanted to ask you there is, like, what are your thoughts on Kierkegaard, and when can we expect him in the Educated Barbarian?
So let's first start with the continuation of the anime discussion, and then we'll move to that. I'll make a connection between the two. So you pointed out something interesting. The events of real life shape art, and they shape our interpretation, because art is a way for us to understand the world. It's a coping mechanism in a sense. And the interesting thing, and the shift you've seen with comics and manga in particular, is the fact that the cultures that tend to produce the more over-the-top masculine figures tend to be the ones that are the most separated from it. So you saw that with like post-World War II Japan, where all of the heroes were impossibly buff, and they start like this, meaning that Dragon Ball Z is an exception, even though one could argue that Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z is not the same series. One was comical, the other one was a shonen. It's not the same thing. At the start of the shonen, Goku is already buff. So it's these guys that are these archetypes of like impossibly strong men that are very hard to relate to, but that was the point. It was to show an absolute and to remind men of what exists out there, what is our essence. And then we transitioned into like the Hajime no Ippo, where he starts just like you, but then he becomes a monster. Ippo, by the end of the manga, is quite literally called a monster. And actually, spoiler alert, I'm going to make videos on Hajime no Ippo very soon on the channel, and the start of that is very soon, meaning that his potential for strength is present from the start and it develops. So it's also a message of hope, and that's that message of hope that makes that type of archetype much more relatable and much more useful. Like if we're talking about like utility, it's because it speaks to young men much more. And then we can connect that to Kierkegaard. So Kierkegaard will be covered. I don't know when, because now we're going to do Nietzsche, we're going to do Jung, we're going to do Dostoevsky, we're going to do a lot of heavy hitters. So we're going to take a little break after a while and then return to the more hermetic writers like Kierkegaard, for example. But the interesting part of his ideology and philosophy, I believe, is that idea of self-actualization. He's one to introspect a lot and to also find in introspection a level of pain. I think that nowadays we have the eat, pray, live, whatever nonsense that people are going to preach as a life philosophy. Well, it's all sunshine and rainbow. But introspection is anything but that. It's horrible to introspect because you're diving deep into depth that you've never actually visited, and there are things hiding underneath the surface that you don't want to see. It's why they're underneath the surface. But only those that are courageous enough to face them will become who they are meant to become. And part of that is also accepting that it's not going to be sunshine and rainbows, which leads to the night of and the idea of resignating yourself to a fate. Many people nowadays take that at face value and think, okay, I can't control my destiny. Fate is predetermined. But that's not what the message is. Neither Nietzsche nor Kierkegaard ever said that. What they say is that you are dealing with a life, and with that life is attached to fate. You can influence that fate, but you also are dealing with some things you cannot move right now. They're unmovable right now. This is what you must accept. The man that accepts his faith is his fate, and faith also is the one that is going to be able to shape it. And that connects to the idea of faith. Faith is the absurd belief that things will be all right. Many people nowadays are not able to do that. They want proof, right? We live in a culture of empiric proof. If you cannot provide a study, a peer-reviewed study, then it doesn't exist in reality, it's not true, and people will not believe it. But the issue is that if you function like this, you will never be able to access the deeper truth and the deeper meaning, because there is no peer-reviewed study about you, about who you are and what you're going to discover. So some of that is going to be accepting that you don't know it yet. You might not know it tomorrow, but at some point you will, only if you stick to it. So now we're going to connect that back to lifting. The best natural lifters are the ones that approach lifting both as a scientific journey, but also as a faith, in a sense, une épreuve, as we say in French, a journey of faith. Because you don't know how big you're going to get. No one can tell you how big you're going to get. All of these people who start, as you said, who think, who ask, how big will I be in 2 years? Can I look like this in 2 years? No one has this answer but you. And the only you that has this answer is the you in the future. So you have to put faith in that you in the future. If you don't, you'll never get there. You'll never be that guy. So it's finding hope in despair, in accepting your current state and understanding that because you have that acceptation, it will lead to better things.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, like, I think, you know, maybe it's just the algorithm making me think it's more common now, but, you know, Guts, for example, like him, and of course, Baldam Man's influence, like getting people to read Berserk. But that's why I think Guts is like the pinnacle of just good manga, like character, masculine character and everything like that. Like, and I don't know if you remember this panel. I think it's in the chapter of Armament, like after he gets the Dragon Slayer, like he's just literally walking forward into the darkness.
Into the darkness, yeah.
Like that is such a powerful panel to me, because that's what it is. It's like you don't know what's in there. You don't know what you're going to find. You don't know what you yourself will become as a result of it, but you know that's where you need to be. And, you know, there's other contexts and other situations going on with him, like why he went there. But, you know, hopefully that doesn't happen to us, right? So, yeah, like that's really, really great points. And I really am interested to hear like your thoughts on Kierkegaard and everything like that, especially because one thing that I think is interesting about his writing is he dealt with there's something that in his writing that I really found like super interesting, and that's the 3 stages of life: the aesthetic, the ethical, and then the religious. And for me, the aesthetic is really easy to understand. It's like, you know, your basal desires. It's what I think most people, when they're like living rationally, it's like what they want to do. It's just like, well, rationally speaking, we're living in the most advanced and like rich society, so why am I broke? And then like they try to rationalize, like, what do I want? I want this, I want that, I should be having this, I should be having that, like this sense of entitlement and like trying to just satisfy your base desires, or like, you know, whatever you think that is, right? And we can kind of go into that and whatnot, but I think the most interesting part of his 3 stages of life is the distinction between the moral or the ethical and the religious. Because there was a question that he has, is there a teleological reason to suspend morality? And there is: faith. So faith would ask you to do some really fucked up things. I mean, if anyone is familiar with the Bible, the reason and the example he uses is the sacrifice of Isaac. Abraham takes his son over a couple-day trip up to a mountain and is like willing and ready to sacrifice his son to God. And you know, some people who like plead insanity will do similar things with their kids, but I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is this: when you sacrifice literally the most important thing to you, you might have a sense of, like, let's say a sense of morality that you would have to like suspend in order to move yourself forward. At least that's I think the idea that he was trying to present there. But what are your thoughts on that?
So this connects to what Nietzsche called the 3 epochs of mankind, which is interesting because it's the number 3 is everywhere, and it's for a reason, right? The Trinity, the Holy Spirit, like all of that it means something symbolically. And in Nietzsche's mind, what he thought was that mankind always sacrificed something. You always have to sacrifice something. We first started to sacrifice each other. So we sacrificed other men. Then we sacrificed our sense of nature, in a sense, our instincts. We turned that into morals. And we said, okay, my body wants this. Like my mind tells me I want this, but the existence of God dictates that this is not good for me. I must sacrifice it. So we sacrificed our instincts to God. And then the 3rd epoch, the one that we're in right now, is the time where man revolts against that pain, but falls into the trap of continuing the sacrifice, and now he sacrifices God. So he sacrifices the control of his instincts, and now the instinct is just released entirely. To connect that with Kierkegaard, it's interesting because in this situation, in this scenario, there's one constant, and that one constant is that there is a choice, and that the choice creates pain, which also induces sacrifice. We are also leading back to Guts and to Berserk. The main theme of Berserk is sacrifice. And again, I'm making Berserk videos, so I'm researching it as much as I can. I read a panel recently that blew my mind because I never realized what it meant. But the apostles of evil, like the Godhead themselves, when they ask the person, they ask them, hey, do you willingly sacrifice this? Do you willingly sacrifice your daughter, for example, to attain immortal life? And if the answer is no, something else is sacrificed. It's them. They die. So someone has to pay a price. Someone is going to suffer pain at some point or the other. It's all up to the decision of the individual. Which one do you pick? The human that is in, for example, his moral period, according to Kierkegaard, is going to sacrifice the other 2 things. He's going to sacrifice the desires of the flesh, and he's going to sacrifice also the religion, because he's going to select that one thing. If you are to decide which one of the 3 states is the best, there's no real answer to that. There's a reason why all of these modes of life, like hedonism, or just not blind necessarily, but absolute adoration of a god and religion, or just adopting like modern morals, like most people are. Most people subscribe to the god of modernity, which is the god of modern morals. All of that is that personal choice. I don't think that there is a best of anything, but what is important is that succession. how did we get from there to there to there? How did mankind get there? Because if you can understand the process, you can understand what it means as well. It's a mistake I see many people make when they talk about Nietzsche. They think Nietzsche hated God. He didn't hate God. He perceived that what religion did to humans led us to a situation where we're now in trouble, because we are now not one with the sacrifice. We have become hypocrites. The sacrifice used to make sense. People used to willingly sacrifice. That was faith. Faith was. It was the sacrifice of reason. You knew that what you was doing was absurd, like the sacrifice of Isaac, in the sense where he didn't want to kill his son, but his God told him to. So he sacrificed his own son, his own flesh, that's symbolical as well, to be able to be aligned with a higher level of value. And it's that higher level of value that's always present, that's absurd and makes no sense. It's that resignation that you see in God. He walks towards the darkness for revenge, but is it only for revenge? Not necessarily. It's just that it's the only path he has left. So he has to sacrifice one thing. He sacrifices his reason. He could have went back at this moment. He could have spent the rest of his life hiding away with Casca, who wasn't doing well. Because at the end of the day, who was going to tell him anything? No one remembered the eclipse. He was the only survivor of the eclipse. The other one was insane. So he took it upon himself to sacrifice that comfort, because he understood that what was at the end might be a better future.
Yeah, and that's like a good way to kind of think about, like, I don't know when or where, or like, so maybe you can fill me in, because I'm actually kind of like, whenever I go on social media, it's usually just for memes, and I never for fitness content, because I just know how bad it is. But I do think, like the idea of the black pill, like people are just, they look at so many different things, and they just have lost their faith in their own ability to be strong, to be muscular, to be masculine, to be better than who they are right now. And then they have to hate anything that kind of shows against that. And, I don't think that that's necessarily going to change, because, a difficult lifestyle is always going to be difficult. Like, let's say, for example, reading. Yeah, reading is so much more available now, but it's still a very like niche kind of hobby. It's like not everyone like picks up books and reads, just because now we can have it on audio books, we can have it in our tablets, we can have it in our phones and everything like that. The printing press and every other technology we've developed since then, yeah, it got it out to more people, and that's good. But it never, like, I think the percentage of people who like actually willingly go with it, I think is always going to be pretty low for the most part, but it can steadily increase. I'm not saying it's going to be static. I'm just saying, like, it can increase. That's just something that is going to deal with for quite a while. But when it comes to like these black pilled lifters, you think like, oh, like, show me the study that I can get big. It's like, you are the study. Like, commit yourself to it. Go down that path. Like, that is literally your only path. You can't find a scientific study that's suddenly going to make your training so good that you're just going to get gains like as a sure thing. The only thing you can do is just walk that path. So I really do like that point. And then going back to Kierkegaard and, like, the religious and the need for sacrifice. People are so unwilling to think that there is something better than what they can believe. Like, like they, for whatever reason, like, faith is just something that they just have discarded so completely. And as a result, when you discard with faith, like what you're doing is not saying to yourself, like, I'm liberating myself. I personally think that what you're doing is you're putting like even heavier chains on you, because now you have nothing. Now there's if you find that rationality just leads you to a bunch of dead ends, and then faith is just, there's nothing that you can do beyond that, and faith is the answer, and then you get rid of that completely, you've just doomed yourself. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is the root of nihilism. Nihilism was what replaced God in a sense. That's why God is dead, is because the faith was replaced by something else. But at the time, people thought it was going to enlighten them. They thought that the obscurantism of religion was going to be replaced by the light and the sunshine of reason. But it never occurred, because what they failed to realize is that humans rely on faith. You always have faith in something. And if you don't have faith in anything, you still have faith in something. The faith that there is no faith. It's still an absurd belief. And that's why the black pill, for example, is a false God. It's what I call a false God. I'm not saying that there is that one God of religion that is the real God. What I mean is that there is good and bad gods. A good God is the one that is going to improve your life, because he's going to position you in a situation where your faith is now going to push you towards actually bettering yourself. So it doesn't stop at religion. Any type of self-belief that is going to make you want to improve is a good God. But any type of self-belief that is going to make you give up on yourself is not one. And the black pill is that, because the black pill is the renouncement of the possible, right? It defines them. They think and nothing is possible. That's their slogan, that's their mantra. Nothing is possible. And the worst part is that you cannot resonate these people. See, they pretend to be scientifically minded, but that's not true. Because if you were to present them with like factual proof, which doesn't exist, that their potential is infinite, they would find a way to debunk it. Because they have a premise in life, and that premise is nothing is possible. And it starts and ends there. So anything that goes against that, they will reject entirely. And this is why it's a toxic quote. It's a quote that destroys people. Because, as you've said, faith is absolutely necessary. And I know that this throws some people off because they think, well, I'm not religious. You don't need to be religious to have faith. Like, for example, stupid example, what do you think about your own mother? Do you look at her with suspicion, or do you believe in her entirely? Most young men believe in their mother entirely. She's a pure being. She's an angel. Her love for you is infinite. That's faith. That's because that's not true. There's limitations to the love of a mother. All of that is biological as well. But you don't want that. Why? Well, because it would damage your connection with your mom. It's the same thing with faith towards the self. Do you have limits? Yeah, of course. You have genetic limits. You're a human being. You're a mammal. You have limits. But what does it do for you to know these limits? That's what cracks me up when I hear people say, oh, at least it's realistic. What does your realism do for you? Life is realistic enough. This environment will teach you about your limits. You don't have to teach yourself. It doesn't help you to self-limit yourself. You must go out there and let the world decide when you stop, because you might find that you'll go much further than the person that never actually threw anything because he thought he wasn't going to go very far. That's the opposite of the black pill. It's the absence of pill. It's just doing it. Some people say the white pill. Even the white pill I don't like, because it also induces the idea that you have to prove to people they can do something. Why must you need a proof? Just go out there and try, and you will be surprised every single time.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I'm like really looking forward to your installments on Dostoevsky. Like, so I think a lot of what we just mentioned will come up again to that one. So we'll leave it there. So couple quick fire questions, hopefully not too deep, but anything like that, but just like a couple, like if you feel comfortable with, like, just so I want to ask your thoughts on personal trainers and personal training certs, like just your general kind of thought process on those. I was a personal trainer for 4 or 5 years, and yeah, there's a reason why I don't call myself one anymore.
Yeah, no, for having been in gyms for a long time, every personal trainer I met was a twat and someone who didn't know what they were doing and didn't even look like they lifted. And it always cracked me up too, because they had this air of importance about them.
Yeah.
And all of that came from the suit. And it's like, all right, you understand that my grandma could get that suit, right? It doesn't mean that you know what you're doing. And this brings it back to experience and also the ability to showcase with the body. Lifting is one of these areas where you still have people who will tell you, well, you don't have to do to teach. I disagree with that, because it opens the door to scam artists. Because now you've decided that a guy that weighs 130 pounds can teach you about hypertrophy. And the problem is that he might have the knowledge theoretically, but he doesn't know how to apply it. And the issue is that he's trying to teach you how to apply it. So if he can't showcase it with his body, what are the chances he's going to actually be of help? The answer is there is no chance. And it's the reason why personal trainers are usually traps for normies and people who know what they're doing. Either they coach themselves or their coach is strong and jacked.
Yep, totally agree with that. And then next question is, what are some non-anime sources of inspiration for you? Because like we know like you're like into anime and manga, but what are some other sources that you have that like resonate with you?
Well, for me, it's going to be mostly people from my life.
That's good.
So my grandpa, for example, who is someone that I look up to greatly because he's 94, physically active, strong as a bull, still cuts down trees even though he's not technically supposed to, and has always been like that beacon of strength and resilience. He's also stubborn as fuck, which I have taken as well as a trait, meaning that when he wants to do something, he does it and nothing can stop him. And I respect him greatly because he's a patriarch in the good sense of the term, meaning that he has made a massive empire. He has like 10 or 15 great children. He has great grandchildren he plays with to this day. And he represents to me what every man should be. It's someone who is going to expand their power reproduce, have kids, take great care of them, be a great dad, but most importantly, be a good man. So for me, when I picture myself in the future, I want to be like him. And then on the spiritual side, I've had sadly not as many teachers as I would hope, because, and I think many people can relate to that, education is a disappointment. Most of your teachers you're not going to like, they're going to be mediocre people, they're not going to elevate you mentally, but I've had some good encounters, especially with a French teacher in particular in France who was horribly severe. He gave me the worst grades, but I never respected the man more because he was what I consider to be a true genius. A true genius to me is someone who's born with talent and then who uses it. And the guy was that. And he taught me a very important lesson. He made me realize that even though I was smart for my age, I needed to want more. I couldn't just stop there because I was falling into the pitfall that many people enter where they stop growing. And I don't know if you watch Hunter x Hunter, but there's a character in it called Isaac Netero, and he says, the day a man stops striving for more is the day he's dead. And it's something that I live by now, where I want to expand. I want to be smarter. I'm not comfortable or happy with just being smarter than the average person, because the average person is an idiot. For lifters, it's the same thing. I know too many people who say, well, I look better than the average male. Well, good, very good. The average male looks terrible. It means nothing. Don't let these standards define you. It's why I don't like strength standards either. It's because standards, for the most part, look at the lowest denominator, and therefore they also lower the potential of everyone that follow them. Make your own standards. That's what that man taught me. The guy made up a language when he was 14. He never waited for someone to tell him, hey, learn Spanish. No, he was like, I'm going to make my own language. And I took from that, and I understood that spiritually I needed to explore. And it's why I made The Educated Barbarian, because as I talk to you guys and I synthesize concepts, I also learn. And the more I learn, the more intelligent I become, you become, and the more we advance.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And I really do like that you are advocating, like, a real life example. So for me, like, a little bit of a backstory for myself, like I was like one of those, like, I think they're called latchkey kids, where like literally you're just locked inside the house when you get home from school because like both parents were working. So the amount of interactions I had with my parents growing up was incredibly little. And then on top of that, because they're from a completely different country, we moved over here, our connection to our extended family, so cousins, uncles, grandparents, was all very much severed. So locked inside of a house, like no other role models, and literally just staring at a wall. So a lot of my role models did have to come from fiction, but at the same time, I do think that there is so much utility in having someone in your life who can teach you something like that. So I think that you having that example in your life is like wonderful, and I do think that it's something that can be sought after. I do believe that. I think that, like, if like we can have hope in the world that there are other men like that who can show us what it means to be a good man and be like you said, a patriarch, but not in the way that people want to make you think it's like a bad thing. Like, it's a good thing to be a good man.
Yeah, and I think we can end with that, but what you said is true. The issue, and it's an issue that's not really an issue, but the thing with male power fantasies in fiction is that they replace something that should exist in reality, and that is good men, strong men, powerful men. I had to look at these examples because I was lacking that in my life. And I know that many young men are like this, but the good thing is that if you're like this, you now have a chance to become that guy for other kids, to become that guiding light that is going to make them believe, hey, it's going to be okay. You can become who you want to become, and you can inspire people as well. And that it's one of the main key message of my channel as well, is to help you become you. I don't want you to become me or anyone else, because you becoming anyone else would be a tragedy. The best thing you can be is yourself.
That's wonderful. Really like that message. Really appreciate the talk. Really appreciate all the content you've been putting out. Like, I look forward to it all the time. And yeah, I'm really glad that you and many others are like just adding to the space, adding to the amount of people that we can look to as far as like good information, and really do appreciate everything you do. So thank you so much for the talk, man. I'll let you go and have a good one, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.